supposed to be simple. Order a pizza, enjoy your meal, and move on with your night. But sometimes the most ordinary moments hide the most chilling secrets. From delivery instructions that should never be ignored to abandoned homes harboring unspeakable horrors, these Domino's Pizza orders turned into unforgettable nightmares. What would you do if your late-night craving led to something far darker than a simple meal? Story 1. The Last Delivery. I wasn't supposed to be working that night, but my co-worker called in sick and I needed the overtime. It was supposed to be an easy shift, until I got that last delivery address. The night was shaping up to be quiet. Rain tapped softly against the windows of the store as I leaned against the counter, waiting for the next order. It was my 5th night in a row, and I was exhausted. I didn't mind working late, less traffic, bigger tips, but I was counting the minutes until my shift ended. That's when Dave, my manager, burst out of the back office holding a ticket. "Hey, we've got one more," he said, waving it in the air like it was a golden ticket. I groaned. "Come on, Dave, can't someone else take it? I've been running non-stop all night." "Everyone else is either gone or on a delivery. It's this or I take it myself, and you know how much I hate driving in the rain," he said with a grin. I snatched the ticket from his hand, ready to argue, but stopped when I saw the address. 1309 Holloway Road. My stomach sank. Holloway Road wasn't just at the edge of town, it was practically in the middle of nowhere, a narrow, twisting route surrounded by dense woods that locals swore were haunted. I'd never delivered there before, but I'd heard stories I always dismissed as small-town gossip. "Really?" I muttered. "It's the last one of the night," Dave said, slapping me on the back. "Get it done and you can head home." I glanced at the time, 11:23 p.m. The thought of finishing up early was tempting. "Fine," I grumbled, grabbing the insulated bag from the counter. The drive started uneventfully, but the rain was picking up, and my wipers struggled to keep the windshield clear. The further I drove, the fewer streetlights there were, until eventually I was swallowed by darkness. My car's headlights barely pierced the rain, illuminating nothing but the wet, winding road ahead. When I reached the turnoff for Holloway Road, my GPS insisted it was the right way, even though it looked more like a hiking trail than a road. Thick trees lined the path, their branches swaying in the wind and casting eerie shadows across my windshield. "This better be a good tip," I muttered, easing the car onto the gravel path. It felt like I was driving for hours, though it was probably only 10 minutes. The road narrowed, the trees closed in, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I kept glancing in my rearview mirror, half expecting to see headlights or something else. Finally, the house came into view. It was enormous, an old Victorian-style mansion that looked like it hadn't been lived in for decades. The paint was peeling, the windows were dark, and the only sign of life was a single light flickering above the porch. I parked a few yards away, hesitating before stepping out. Something about the house set my nerves on edge, but I pushed the feeling aside. A job was a job. The rain soaked through my jacket as I hurried up the creaking wooden steps. I rang the doorbell and waited, the muffled chime echoing inside the house. A minute passed, then 2. Just as I raised my hand to knock, the door creaked open an inch. A pale hand emerged from the crack holding a $50 bill. "Keep the change," a voice croaked from the darkness. Thanks," I said, trying to peer inside. I couldn't see much, just a long, dimly lit hallway with faded wallpaper and a dusty chandelier. I held out the pizza, but the hand didn't take it. Instead, it trembled slightly before the voice spoke again. "Don't go back the way you came," it said. "Take the long way." Before I could respond, the hand snatched the pizza and the door slammed shut. I stood there for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. Something about the voice stuck with me. It was low and raspy, like someone struggling to breathe, And why had they told me to take the long way? How did they even know which way I'd come? I shook off the unease and headed back to my car. The rain had eased up, but the woods felt darker than before, and the wind howled through the trees like a warning. As I started the car, I decided to follow the advice. I'd take the long way back. Better safe than sorry, right? The alternative route was even more desolate than the one I'd taken earlier. The road twisted and turned through the forest with no sign of civilization in sight. My headlights barely cut through the thick fog that had rolled in, and my nerves were on edge. That's when I saw it. A car parked on the side of the road with its hazard lights blinking faintly. I slowed down, scanning the area for any sign of the driver. The driver's side door was wide open, but there was no one inside. "Hello?" I called out, rolling down my window. No response. Then I saw it, a Domino's Pizza bag lying in the mud near the car. My heart sank. I recognized the logo immediately. It was one of ours. I put the car in park and grabbed my phone, intending to call the police, but before I could dial, a sound came from the woods. It started as a faint rustling, like leaves being disturbed. Then came the snapping of branches, growing louder and closer. "Hello!" I shouted, my voice trembling. A figure emerged from the trees. At first, I thought it was the missing driver, but as they stepped into the light, I realized something was wrong. They were hunched over, their movements jerky and unnatural. "Do you need help?" I asked, gripping the steering wheel tightly. The figure didn't respond. Instead, they tilted their head, as if studying me, and then they smiled, a wide, unnatural grin that stretched across their face. Without warning, they turned and sprinted back into the woods, disappearing into the darkness. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I floored the gas pedal, my tires spinning on the wet road before finding traction. My heart was pounding, and I couldn't shake the image of that twisted smile. When I finally made it back to the store, I was shaking so badly I could barely stand. Dave was cleaning up, oblivious to my panic. "Hey, you're back. How'd it go?" he asked casually. I dropped the pizza bag on the counter without a word. "What happened to this?" he asked, frowning at the mud-streaked bag. "Someone left it by the side of the road," I muttered, my voice barely audible. The next morning, I turned on the news out of habit. My stomach dropped when I saw the headline. "Missing Domino's driver found dead near Holloway Road." The report said the driver's car was found abandoned, with no signs of a struggle. His body was discovered a mile away, his face frozen in an expression of terror. I felt sick. My mind raced back to the pizza bag, the hand at the door, the figure in the woods. As I went to retrieve my mail, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A receipt from the night before tucked under my windshield wiper. It wasn't mine. The name on it wasn't R. Holloway. It was mine. Story 2. The order that never came. The tracker said the pizza was delivered, but I never saw anyone come to my door. Then, the phone rang. It was a quiet Friday night, and I was alone in my apartment, cramming for a psychology midterm. The campus library had closed early, so I decided to settle in at home with my notes scattered across the coffee table and my laptop propped open on a stack of textbooks. By 10:30 p.m., my stomach growled loudly enough to break my concentration. I hadn't eaten since lunch, and the instant ramen in my cupboard wasn't cutting it. That's when I remembered the Domino's flyer tucked under my fridge magnet. Without much thought, I grabbed my phone and placed an order: a large pepperoni pizza with extra cheese and a side of garlic bread. It was my go-to comfort food. The app confirmed my order and displayed the estimated delivery time, 25 to 30 minutes. I clicked on the tracker, watching as it updated step by step. Order received, pizza in the oven, delivery driver on the way. By the time it hit out for delivery, I was practically drooling. 30 minutes passed, then 40. My phone buzzed with a notification. "Your order has been delivered. Enjoy your meal." I frowned. Delivered? No one had knocked, no one had rung the bell, and there was no sign of a pizza outside my door. I stepped into the hallway, glancing at the doors of my neighbors. The building was quiet as usual. Even the guy in 3B, who always blasted music late at night, seemed to be asleep. Confused, I returned to my apartment and double-checked the app. It still said the same thing. Delivered. Then my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a call from an unknown number. "Hello," I answered, annoyed. A low, muffled voice replied, "Your pizza is outside." "Outside where?" I asked, my irritation growing. "I've been waiting for nearly an hour, and there's nothing here." The line went silent for a moment. Then the voice said, "Check again." Before I could respond, the call ended. I opened the door and stepped into the hallway once more. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered slightly, casting strange shadows along the walls. I hesitated, feeling an odd sense of unease. Then I saw it. Sitting directly in front of my door was a single slice of pizza, perfectly centered on a grease-stained napkin. My stomach churned, not with hunger, but with unease. I glanced up and down the hallway. It was empty. Hesitant, I picked up the slice and brought it inside. The cheese had congealed, the pepperoni was cold, and it smelled faintly of something metallic, like pennies. I tossed it into the trash, deciding to call Domino's and demand a refund. But as I dialed the number, my phone buzzed with another notification. "Thank you for your order. Please rate your experience." I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. Something wasn't right. Later that night, strange things started happening. It began with the sound of footsteps outside my door, slow, deliberate, and unmistakable. At first, I assumed it was one of my neighbors, but when I peeked through the peephole, the hallway was empty. The footsteps returned every few minutes, each time growing louder. Then came the knocking, soft at first, then more insistent. I pressed my eye to the peephole again, holding my breath. This time I saw something. A figure stood at the far end of the hallway, their back turned to me. They were tall and thin, dressed in a dark hoodie that obscured their face. "Hello?" I called through the door. The figure didn't move. I backed away, my pulse racing. The knocking stopped, but now there was another sound, a faint scratching, like nails dragging along the wood. I grabbed my phone and called the building's security office. When no one answered, I called the police. "Someone's outside my door," I whispered into the phone. "They won't leave." The dispatcher assured me that an officer would be sent over immediately. I hung up and waited, staring at the door with my heart in my throat. When the police arrived, the hallway was empty. "There's no one here," one of the officers said, glancing around. "They were standing right there," I insisted, pointing to the spot where I'd seen the figure. The officers exchanged a look, clearly skeptical. They took a quick report and left, advising me to call back if anything else happened. I locked the door and double-checked all the windows before returning to the couch. The trash can caught my eye, and I remembered the slice of pizza I'd thrown away. I hesitated before opening the lid. The napkin was still there, but the pizza slice was gone. The next day, I did some digging. I searched for anything about weird occurrences involving pizza deliveries in my area. That's when I found it, a forum thread titled "Creepy Deliveries." One post caught my attention immediately. Has anyone else had this happen? You order pizza, but it never arrives. Or worse, it does. But something's off. I had a driver call me saying my pizza was outside, but when I opened the door, all I found was a single slice. The next day, strange things started happening in my apartment. Unexplained noises, objects moving on their own. I thought I was losing my mind until I saw him. The post ended there, with no follow-up. Over the next few nights, the strange occurrences escalated. My lights flickered constantly, and I could hear faint whispers in the middle of the night, though I couldn't make out the words. One morning, I woke up to find a pizza box sitting on my kitchen counter. I hadn't ordered anything, and the door was still locked. Inside the box was a single slice, burned to a crisp. A message was scrawled inside the lid in red marker. You were next. I packed my bags that same day and moved out of the apartment. Whatever was happening, I wanted no part of it. But even now, months later, I can't shake the feeling that it's not over. Sometimes, when I'm home alone, I hear faint footsteps outside my door, or worse, the soft sound of scratching, and every so often I get a notification on my phone from Dominos. Thank you for your order. Please rate your experience. Story 3. Pepperoni and Screams. I thought my neighbors were just throwing a party, but then I heard the scream, loud and unmistakable. Living in apartment 4C of the Western Heights complex had always been uneventful. The building was old, with peeling wallpaper in the hallways and a faint smell of mildew that no one seemed to notice anymore. My neighbors mostly kept to themselves, which suited me just fine. But everything changed one Friday night. It started like any other evening. I was on my couch binging a true crime docu-series and working my way through a Domino's medium pepperoni pizza with extra cheese. It was my Friday night ritual, a little indulgence after a long week at the office. Around 9 p.m. I heard a loud thud from the apartment next door. It wasn't unusual for the couple in 4D to have arguments, so I ignored it. But then came another noise, a strange rhythmic banging, like something heavy being dragged across the floor. I paused the show, listening intently. The sound stopped for a moment, and then I heard it. A scream. Not a shout, not an argument. A full, gut-wrenching scream that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I jumped to my feet, staring at the wall that separated my apartment from 4D. The scream had been so loud, so visceral, that I was certain I hadn't imagined it. "Everything okay over there?" I called, my voice trembling slightly. No response. I debated calling the building manager, but the Western Heights management was notoriously useless. Last winter, it had taken them 3 weeks to fix a broken heater in one of the units, and I doubted they'd rush to check on a noise complaint. Instead, I decided to investigate myself. I opened my door cautiously, peeking into the dimly lit hallway. The hallway was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that feels intentional, like the building itself was holding its breath. I walked over to 4D and knocked, the sound echoing down the corridor. No answer. "Hello?" I called. "I thought I heard something. Is everything okay?" Still nothing. I leaned closer, pressing my ear to the door. That's when I heard the whispering. It was faint at first, like someone mumbling just beneath their breath. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unsettling. It wasn't an argument or even a conversation. It sounded more like a chant. "Is someone in there?" I asked, knocking again. "Do you need help?" The chanting stopped abruptly, replaced by an oppressive silence. I felt a chill run down my spine. Something wasn't right. I was about to turn back to my apartment when I noticed the faint glow of light seeping out from beneath the door. It flickered like candlelight, casting strange shadows on the carpet. Then the smell hit me. It was sharp and metallic, mixed with the faint, sickly sweet aroma of garlic and oregano. At first, I thought it was just the remnants of my own pizza lingering in the air. But this was different, stronger, more nauseating. My stomach churned and I backed away, suddenly unsure of what I'd stumbled into. I returned to my apartment and locked the door, trying to shake the unease that had settled over me. I reasoned with myself. Maybe they were just cooking something weird, or maybe I'd misheard the scream. But deep down, I knew better. I spent the next hour glued to the peephole, watching the hallway for any sign of movement. I didn't see anyone leave 4D, but the shadows beneath their door continued to flicker, and every now and then, I thought I heard that faint whispering again. Just as I was beginning to convince myself it was nothing, a knock startled me. Not at my door, at theirs. Peeking through the peephole, I saw a Domino's delivery driver standing outside 4D, holding a large pizza bag. He knocked again, his expression growing impatient. "Delivery for 4D, he called, his voice echoing down the empty hallway. No one answered. The driver hesitated, glancing at the order slip before knocking one more time. "Domino's, your pizza's here." The door to 4D creaked open just a crack. I couldn't see who was inside, but the driver's body language shifted immediately. He stepped back, suddenly nervous, as if he'd seen something he wasn't prepared for. Here's your pizza," he said, holding the bag out tentatively. The door opened a little wider, just enough for a pale, thin hand to reach out and take the bag. The driver stepped back again, his unease palpable. "Have a good night," he mumbled, turning quickly and heading toward the elevator. I watched as the door to 4D closed, and the light beneath it flickered out entirely. I barely slept that night. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant sound in the building made my heart race. The next morning, I decided to talk to the building manager. If something strange was going on in 4D, they needed to know. But when I mentioned the apartment number, the manager frowned. 4D? No one's lived there in months. I stared at him, dumbfounded. "That's not possible. I've heard people in there. I've seen deliveries being made." He shook his head. "That apartment's been vacant since the last tenants moved out. We've been trying to rent it out, but no one's interested." I didn't believe him, so I decided to do some research of my own. I scoured the internet for anything about the building, hoping to find some explanation. That's when I found an old news article about a murder that had taken place in 4D years ago. A man had killed his wife and 2 kids in a fit of rage before taking his own life. The article mentioned that neighbors had reported strange sounds coming from the apartment in the weeks leading up to the incident. Screams, chanting, and the smell of something burning. The story sent chills down my spine. I tried to stay away from 4D after that, but it wasn't easy. The noises continued, whispers, faint thuds, and that awful scream every now and then. One night, I woke up to find a pizza box sitting outside my door. I hadn't ordered anything, but the box had my name written on it in messy red handwriting. When I opened it, there was no pizza inside, just a note that read, "Come join us." That was the last straw. I moved out of Western Heights the following week, leaving behind my lease and most of my belongings. But even now, in my new apartment miles away, I sometimes hear faint whispering at night. And every so often, I find a Domino's box on my doorstep with no explanation of where it came from. I don't open them anymore. Story 4, the receipt. When I checked my receipt, there was something handwritten that didn't belong. "Get out." Moving into a new apartment is supposed to be exciting, a fresh start, a blank slate. That's what I kept telling myself as I unpacked box after box in my cramped one-bedroom unit. It wasn't much, but it was mine. By the time I finished organizing the basics, it was nearly 8 p.m. My stomach growled loudly, reminding me that I hadn't eaten all day. I didn't feel like cooking, so I reached for my phone and ordered a pizza from Domino's. Large double pepperoni, extra cheese. Comfort food at its finest. The app confirmed my order, estimating a 30-minute delivery time. As I waited, I tried to distract myself by setting up the living room, but I kept glancing nervously at the window. The apartment was eerily quiet, save for the occasional creak of the floorboards. The building was old, and the thin walls made it easy to hear my neighbors. But tonight there was nothing. I brushed off the unease, convincing myself that I was just tired from the move. Exactly 30 minutes later, the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find a delivery driver standing there, holding the pizza bag with a strained smile. He was younger than I expected, with messy blonde hair and dark circles under his eyes, like he hadn't slept in days. "Order for Rachel?" he asked, glancing at the receipt stapled to the bag. "That's me," I replied, handing over a $20 bill. "Keep the change." He nodded, handing me the pizza. But as I reached for the bag, I noticed something unusual. His hand was trembling, Not a subtle shake, but a noticeable tremor, like he was nervous or cold. "You okay?" I asked. He hesitated, his eyes darting toward the dark hallway behind me. "Yeah, just be careful tonight," he muttered, before turning and walking briskly back to his car. His words lingered in my mind as I closed the door. Setting the pizza box on the counter, I opened it and was greeted by the familiar smell of melted cheese and greasy pepperoni. My unease began to fade, but when I glanced at the receipt stapled to the bag, something stopped me cold. Scrawled in messy red handwriting beneath the printed order details were 2 words: "Get out." At first I thought it was some kind of joke. Maybe the driver had a weird sense of humor, but the handwriting looked hurried, frantic. The ink was slightly smudged, as if written by someone with shaking hands. I set the receipt aside, trying not to let it bother me. It was probably nothing, just some bored driver messing with me. An hour later, I was sprawled on the couch, flipping through TV channels when the lights began to flicker. "Seriously," I muttered, glancing at the overhead bulb. The building's wiring was ancient, so I wasn't surprised. But then the flickering stopped, and everything went dark. The power was out. I fumbled for my phone, turning on the flashlight and cursing under my breath. The hallway outside my apartment was pitch black, the only sound the faint hum of my phone in my hand. "Great first night," I muttered sarcastically, grabbing a flashlight from one of the unpacked boxes. I decided to check the breaker box in the hallway. Opening my apartment door, I stepped into the hallway and immediately froze. There was someone standing at the far end of the corridor. The figure was barely visible in the dim light, but I could make out their silhouette. They were tall, with their head tilted slightly, as if they were watching me. "Hello," I called, my voice shaking slightly. No response. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, waiting for the figure to move or speak. Instead, they turned slowly and walked out of sight, disappearing around the corner. My heart pounded as I stepped back into my apartment and locked the door. I tried to convince myself that it was just another tenant, but something about the way they moved didn't feel right. Their slow, deliberate steps, the eerie way they tilted their head, it all felt wrong. I decided to distract myself by unpacking more boxes, hoping to shake off the unease. But as I moved around the apartment, I kept hearing faint noises, the soft creak of floorboards, the subtle sound of something brushing against the walls. At one point, I thought I heard whispering. I checked every room, even the small utility closet, but there was no one there. Around midnight, I finally decided to call it a night. I was too tired to keep unpacking, and the pizza had left me feeling sluggish. But as I headed to bed, something caught my eye: the receipt. It was still sitting on the counter, but now the writing had changed. The words, "Get out," were gone, replaced by a new message: "It's already here." I stared at the receipt, my blood running cold. My mind raced, trying to rationalize what I was seeing. Had I misread it earlier? Was this some kind of prank? Before I could think too much about it, I heard a noise from the living room, a low, guttural sound that made my skin crawl. Clutching my flashlight, I crept back toward the living room, my heart pounding with every step. The sound grew louder, a wet, choking noise that seemed to echo off the walls. When I reached the living room, I saw it. At first, I thought it was a shadow, a trick of the flickering light from the street lamp outside. But as my eyes adjusted, I realized it was something else entirely. A figure stood hunched over in the corner, its body twisted unnaturally. Its skin was pale and mottled, stretched tight over sharp, angular bones. I froze, unable to move or breathe. The figure slowly turned its head, and I saw its face. A hollow, eyeless void with a wide, jagged grin that seemed to stretch impossibly far. It took a step toward me, and I stumbled backward, dropping the flashlight. The beam of light spun wildly across the room, illuminating the creature's distorted form in flashes. I bolted for the door, flinging it open and racing into the hallway. I didn't stop running until I was outside, the cold night air stinging my lungs. My hands trembled as I fumbled with my phone, dialing the police. When they arrived, they found nothing in the apartment. No figure, no strange sounds, just an empty, quiet space. The receipt was gone too. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I packed up whatever I could fit into my car and left. A week later, I received an email from Dominos asking me to rate my experience. Attached was a copy of the receipt. Beneath the printed details was a final message. See you soon. Story 5. Extra cheese. The note with the order read, "Please don't come upstairs." I should have listened. It was late, and I was exhausted. The rush of dinner orders had finally died down, leaving the Domino's store quiet, except for the hum of the ovens. My shift was almost over when the printer spat out another ticket, a delivery order for a house way out on the edge of town. I groaned, scanning the address. It wasn't just far. It was a location I'd heard stories about. Locals called it the McAllister House, a decaying Victorian mansion surrounded by dense woods. Rumor had it, no one lived there anymore. "Lucky you," my manager said, handing me the insulated bag with a smirk. "Why does it have to be me?" I grumbled, grabbing my keys. "Because you're still on the clock," he shot back. "Now go make some tips." The ticket included a handwritten note. "Leave the pizza on the porch. Do not knock. Do not come upstairs." I laughed nervously, showing it to my manager. "What kind of creepy note is this?" He shrugged. "People are weird. Just drop it off and go." The drive took nearly 25 minutes, most of it on a narrow, winding road surrounded by trees. The further I went, the darker it got. My high beams barely cut through the thick fog that clung to the forest, and the only sound was the crunch of gravel under my tires. When I finally reached the house, it was even worse than I'd imagined. The McAllister house loomed in the darkness, its peeling paint and broken windows giving it an almost skeletal appearance. A single light glowed weakly on the front porch, casting long, jagged shadows across the overgrown yard. I parked the car and hesitated, staring at the mansion. The air felt heavy, like the house itself was watching me. Clutching the pizza bag, I made my way up the creaking wooden steps. The porch sagged beneath my weight, and the light above flickered ominously. I placed the pizza on a small, weathered table near the door, careful not to make too much noise. As I turned to leave, something caught my eye. A movement in one of the upstairs windows. I froze, squinting into the darkness. For a brief moment, I thought I saw a face, a pale, distorted face staring back at me, but when I blinked, it was gone. My heart pounded as I hurried back to my car, but as I reached for the door handle, I stopped. Something didn't feel right. I turned back toward the house. The note on the ticket replayed in my mind. "Do not come upstairs." Curiosity gnawed at me. Who was living in this crumbling mansion, and why had they written that note? Against my better judgment, I grabbed a flashlight from the glove compartment and made my way back to the porch. The door was slightly ajar. I told myself I'd just peek inside, just enough to satisfy my curiosity. Pushing the door open, I stepped into the house. The air inside was damp and musty, thick with the scent of decay. The walls were lined with faded wallpaper, curling at the edges, and the wooden floor groaned under my weight. "Hello?" I called, my voice echoing through the empty halls. No response. I should have left. I should have turned around and walked out. But instead, I found myself moving deeper into the house, the beam of my flashlight slicing through the darkness. The downstairs was cluttered with old furniture and boxes, like someone had left in a hurry and never returned. But what struck me most were the scratches. long, jagged marks gouged into the walls and floor, as if something with claws had been let loose. Then I heard it, a faint noise from upstairs, a soft, rhythmic creaking, like someone rocking back and forth in a chair. My stomach tightened as I remembered the note. Do not come upstairs. I wanted to leave, but my feet seemed to move on their own, carrying me toward the staircase. The creaking grew louder as I ascended, each step more nerve-wracking than the last. At the top of the stairs, the air felt colder. The hallway was lined with closed doors, and the creaking was coming from the room at the end. I moved cautiously, my flashlight trembling in my hand. The door was slightly open, and as I approached, I saw a faint glow spilling out into the hallway. Peering inside, I saw what was making the noise. A rocking chair sat in the center of the room, moving slowly back and forth. It was empty, but the motion was steady, as if someone had just been sitting there. The walls were covered in more scratches, along with something else, symbols drawn in what looked like dried blood. They crisscrossed every surface, forming patterns I couldn't make sense of. Then I saw the bed. It was pushed against the far wall, its sheets stained and torn. A single pizza box sat in the center, its lid slightly ajar. I approached cautiously, my pulse racing. Inside the box was a slice of pizza, half-eaten, with what looked like a bite taken out of the crust. But there was something else, a piece of paper tucked beneath the slice. I pulled it out, my hands shaking. The message scrawled on it made my blood run cold. You shouldn't have come upstairs. Suddenly, the rocking chair stopped. The silence was deafening, and I felt the unmistakable sensation of being watched. I spun around, shining my flashlight across the room. That's when I saw it. A figure stood in the corner, shrouded in darkness. Its body was tall and emaciated, its head cocked at an unnatural angle. Two glowing eyes stared back at me, unblinking. I stumbled backward, dropping the flashlight. The beam spun wildly, illuminating the creature's twisted form in flashes. It moved toward me, its movements jerky and unnatural, like a puppet being pulled by invisible strings. I bolted out of the room, my heart pounding in my chest. I practically flew down the stairs, nearly tripping over myself in my desperation to escape. I didn't stop running until I was back in my car. My hands shook as I fumbled with the keys, finally managing to start the engine. As I sped away from the house, I glanced in the rearview mirror. For a split second, I thought I saw the figure standing on the porch, watching me leave. When I got back to the store, I handed the pizza bag to my manager without a word. You look like you've seen a ghost, he joked. I didn't respond. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of my apartment sent a wave of panic through me. But the worst part came the next morning. A Domino's box was sitting on my doorstep. Inside was a single slice of pizza with a note that read, "Next time, listen." I quit my job that same day.